Normally at this time of the year, this place is bustling with people and pilgrims and filled with sounds. But today, St. Peter's Square is quiet. As a result of the pandemic, never before in history has St. Peter's Square been so silent. And in many of us, this silence evokes feelings of fear, of anxiety, of the unknown. And you have to wonder, are these the same feelings that those women and disciples felt 2,000 years ago when they rolled back the stone to find that tomb also empty and silent? On this Vaticano special from Rome, we are going to take you on a journey that goes back 2,000 years in time and to the very center of Christianity. And along the way, we will discover places and stories that still bear witness to that empty tomb in Jerusalem today. Now, to take this journey, we are going to retrace the life of a man, a soldier, and an emperor. A man who made the Christian religion an important part of one of the greatest empires that ever existed, the Roman Empire. I'm talking, of course, of Constantine the Great. Nicknamed Tracula, which means bull neck, because of his physical appearance, Constantine is the man who brings Roman history and the history of Christianity together. And it all began a few miles away at the gates of the city of Rome, with a battle that would change the entire Western world forever, the famous Battle of Ponte Milvio. And it was here, on the banks of the Tiber River, that on the 28th of October, 312 AD, Constantine would go head-to-head with his biggest rival, his brother-in-law, Maxentius, in a battle that would change the course of history. But to understand what happened on that day, we have to stop and go back and ask the question, who was Constantine and why did he arrive here with his troops at the gates of the city of Rome? (273 to 274 AD), Constantine was born in the Illyrian territory of Nesh, present-day Serbia. His father, Constantius Chlorus, is an officer in the Roman army, while his mother, Helena, is a simple stable attendant. 284 AD, in Nicomedia, present-day Turkey, the soldier Diocletian becomes emperor. Given the difficulty of governing the entire emperor divided between East and West, Diocletian establishes the Tetrarchy, that is, a government of four, consisting of two who had absolute power with the title Augustus, and two vice-emperors called Caesars. Diocletian and Galerius ruled the east, and Maximian and Constantius Chlorus, Constantine's father, ruled the western part of the empire. A few years later, a harsh persecution against Christians begins and lasts until the beginning of the 4th century. 305 AD. The two Augustuses abdicate and their respective Caesars take power, Constantius Chlorus in the west and Galerius in the east, as deputy emperors or Caesars are left out, the son of Constantius Chlorus, Constantine, and Maxentius, son of Maximian. 306 AD. Constantius Chlorus dies in Britain, and the army acclaims as emperor his son Constantine, who had already been successful in his military campaigns. The same thing happens with Maxentius, the son of the Augustus Maximian. He takes control of Rome. At this point, the tetrarchic system established by Diocletian fell into crisis, and several civil wars began. Constantine aligned himself with Maxentius, taking his sister Fausta as his wife. However, the alliance was short-lived. as Constantine betrayed his brother-in-law and attacked him in order to conquer the capital and take control of the entire West. At the gates of Rome, on the Milvian Bridge, the two brothers-in-law clash on the 28th of October, 312 AD. According to tradition, on the eve of the battle against Maxentius, Constantine sees in the sky a remarkable sight, a trophy of the cross made from light with an inscription that translated read, "By this sign you will win." After this omen, the future emperor had a golden pole made in the shape of a cross, with a crown at the top bearing the initials of Christ in Greek, also known as the Christogram, a symbol that the future emperor would also have engraved on the helmets and shields of his soldiers. Constantine and his troops advance here to the banks of the river Tiber, and they wait. They wait for the troops of Maxentius. And to find out what happened on that day and how it went on to change the course of history and change the course of Christianity, I'm joined by Filippo Forlani. He's a professor of medieval church history. Professor, nice to meet you. Why did Constantine declare war on his brother-in-law?
Maxentius was basically considered a usurper both by Constantine and also by Licinius, who at that time was the Augustus of the East. And Maxentius was opposed to the great change that was taking place within the empire. So he wanted to maintain and preserve power here in Rome, thanks to the support of the Senate and the support of the Praetorians. And this was creating a clash not only of power, but also of the vision of the structure of the empire.
Bring us back to that day. What kind of battle was it?
So we have to imagine about 170,000 men clashing a little further north towards Saxa Rubra, and the armies were opposed and deployed in a mirror image, with the infantry at the center. Maxentius had about 100,000 infantry and about 18,000 cavalry lined up on either side. Constantine, on the other hand, had 40,000 men, 40,000 infantry, with about 10,000 horsemen on either side. He began to attack Constantine with his cavalry, which attacked Maxentius's cavalry and annihilated it. At that point, Maxentius was surrounded. He had Constantine's infantry in front and cavalry on either side surrounding and closing in on him. And little by little, Constantine managed to push Maxentius's army towards the Tiber. And so, here we say the battle ended with Constantine's victory.
Now, it's believed that Constantine had a much smaller army than his brother-in-law, Maxentius. So how did he claim victory?
Basically, Maxentius had made a mistake in his strategy, or rather he changed it at the last moment. He had brought a great deal of food here to Rome in order to survive a siege. A long siege protected by the Aurelian walls. 18 kilometers of walls about 6 meters high that protected the city. And we have to think that until the modern age, those who defend, the army that defends, tends to have an advantage over those who attack. But on that day, he suddenly changes his mind. One thinks because the battle coincided exactly on the same day that Maxentius had seized power in Rome 6 years earlier, and so he thought it was a favorable day. So he decided to build a pontoon bridge, let the army through, and began because he wanted a pitched battle. He wanted to destroy Constantine's army, but at the same time he thought, if I have the army of boats, I can afford a last-minute retreat. But this retreat was very chaotic, because Constantine's army was very fierce. And so the army retreating in confusion went over this pontoon bridge. The bridge broke and all the troops ended up in the Tiber, including Maxentius, who drowned.
How did Constantine's victory really start the spread of Christianity across the empire?
By that time, let's say, Christianity had already spread throughout the empire. Certainly, what Constantine did was to recognize, in the following year, Christianity as religio licita. So it became one of the religions that could be professed within the empire. Then, we must also think about this. For example, if we do not go to work on Sundays today, it is thanks to Constantine, because it was he who decided to declare Sunday a public holiday. And from that moment on, the whole of the West continued not to work on Sundays. And then he made many other decisions in favor of the Christians, such as giving back the goods that had been confiscated during the persecutions. And he had several basilicas built within the city of Rome, or even in Jerusalem. In this way, Christianity actually gained strength and really became a driving force within the empire.
So this really was a battle that was to go on to change the course of history.
Clearly, this was one of the most important battles in the history of mankind, and it was one of the battles that changed the history of mankind as a whole.
Professor, it was great meeting you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are many theories about Constantine's conversion to Christianity. One such legend is that he was only baptized on his deathbed by Pope Sylvester at the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Maybe it is true and maybe it is just that, a legend. But one thing that is for certain is that one of the defining elements of the Constantine era was religious freedom. Constantine would go on to travel and leave his mark beyond the borders of the city of Rome. For example, in Jerusalem, he ordered the demolition of a pagan temple that was dedicated to the goddess Venus. He wanted to shine a light on the sepulchre of Jesus on that very holy land. And in its place, he built a magnificent basilica that we now know today as the Basilica of the Holy Sepulchre. Well, we've a quick break to take, but when we come back, we'll continue to walk in the footsteps of Constantine. This Vaticano special from Rome continues in just a moment. After the victory at the Battle of Ponte Milvio, Christianity began to spread across the Roman Empire. In fact, it's incredible to think that just 15 years after the death of Constantine, more than 50% of the population of the entire Roman Empire was now Christian. Now, Constantine never really spent much of his life in Rome. Instead, he decided to rebuild the city of Byzantium and then renamed it Constantinople, the city we know today as Istanbul in Turkey. And it was there in that city that he left a very important figure. He left his mother, Helena, who would later go on to be Saint Helena. According to a collection of testimonies of the lives of saints known as the Golden Legend, Saint Helena in 326 AD made a journey destined to remain imprinted in history. She decided to travel to the Holy Land to visit the sites of Christ's Passion. And from this pilgrimage, she brought back to Rome important relics, one of which was a fragment of the true cross of Jesus. The relics that St. Helena brought back to Rome are located here in the Basilica right next to me, known as the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. And it was this very building that was commissioned by Constantine and constructed using building materials from the late 2nd century. This is where St. Helena decided to keep the relics from the Holy Land. And to tell me more about this, I'm joined by Olof Brandt. He's a professor at the Pontifical Institute of Christian Archaeology. Professor, great to meet you. How did the relics end up in this place?
It was in the years after, between the council at Nicaea in 325 and the death of Helena 4 years later, that Constantine built several important sanctuaries in the Holy Land at the biblical places in Jerusalem and Bethlehem. And at the same time, he brought a relic of the Holy Cross to Rome and put it here in a hall of the imperial palace, which he transformed into a church and gave it the name Jerusalem. And it is only 70 years later that the discovery of the cross was attributed to Helena herself by St. Ambrose in Milan, who says that Helena discovered the Holy Cross together with the inscription of the cross. And after that moment, it becomes very complicated to follow the history of these relics through the Middle Ages, but they are still here.
Now, you mentioned there that before this was a basilica, it was an imperial palace. So how did it go from an imperial residence to a basilica?
Yes, this was one of the imperial palaces of Rome with its own amphitheater and so on. One of the biggest halls was transformed into a church simply by adding an apse on one of the short ends of this rectangular building. So it became a simple rectangular hall with an apse, and then much later in the 12th century, Pope Lucius II divided it in 3 aisles, transforming it into a regular basilica church, which was then redecorated in the 15th century, and then in the early 18th century, this Rococo facade was added, which changed completely the aspect of this church.
It's a fascinating history, and in a moment we're going to go in and see the relics of the true cross of Jesus and other relics as well that bear witness to his passion. But before we do that, what can we really say about their authenticity?
Many of these relics arrived here in the later Middle Ages, and that was the period of the Crusades when many relics of the Passion were imported to Rome from the Holy Land, and it's really difficult to say anything at all about their authenticity. The 2 main relics here were always the Holy Cross and the inscription of the cross, which were always at the center of the devotion and the attention of pilgrims. They have never been proved to be fake. Although it's very difficult to reconstruct their history because the attitude to relics have changed. Today we are used to observe relics. They are exposed in reliquaries. In the early Middle Ages they were always hidden beneath the floor, beneath the altar of the church, so the pilgrims couldn't see the relics, but in some way they felt that the spiritual power of the relics embraced the entire church building.
Professor, thank you so much for your time. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
We're now inside the Basilica of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem, and the tradition has been for centuries that on every Good Friday, popes would walk here barefoot to pay homage to the relics of the Passion of Christ. Now, since 1930, those relics have been kept in a small chapel called the Chapel of the Relics. Now, that chapel is just up at the top of these steps, and the relics are encased in glass. The holy relics are placed in precious reliquaries and protected by a glass case. And here is a fragment of the true cross on which Jesus was condemned to death. Inside this other shrine are the other very important relics. One of the nails used for Jesus' crucifixion, 2 thorns from the crown placed on Christ's head, fragments from the grotto of the Nativity and the Holy Sepulchre, the phalanx of St. Thomas's finger, the unbelieving disciple who needed to touch Jesus' hand and side in order to believe, the parabolas of the good thief, known as Saint Disma of the apocryphal Gospel of Nicodemus. He is the one who asked Jesus on the cross to remember him when he enters the kingdom of heaven. And finally, the Titulus Crucis, that is the tablet written in Hebrew, Greek and Latin characters, placed on the cross of Jesus, which states the reason for his death sentence: Nazarian, King of the Jews. Found in the 15th century, walled up inside the apsidal arch of the basilica. In the apse of the Basilica, the frescoes tell the story of the legend of the true cross. And in this vaulted apse, it's like a large book with the stories of the relics. Like reading a book, starting from the left and going to the right, we see Saint Helena already in the Holy Land, in Jerusalem, asking a Jew, not by chance, named Judas, where the true cross is hidden. After a bit of resistance, Judas, who will even become Bishop of Jerusalem with the name of Syriac, reveals the place where the cross of Jesus is hidden. Towards the right, we can see how the three crosses are brought to light during the excavations. In order to distinguish the true cross of Jesus, they have a corpse laid on each piece of wood, and when it came into contact with the true cross, the corpse came back to life. Finally, in the center of the apse, Helena is seen holding the rediscovered cross. Kneeling in prayer at her side is Cardinal Pietro González de Mendoza, titular of the Basilica from 1478 to 1495. Now, the legend of the true cross states that Saint Helena divided the cross into three parts. The first, she left in Jerusalem. The second, she gave to her son Constantine, who was then living in Constantinople, then Turkey. And the third, she brought with her back to Rome, where she was living. They're the remains we've just seen in the Basilica behind me. And people still come here today to kneel and pray in front of the relics. Now, of course, we can never be certain that these are genuine relics from the Passion of Jesus, but what we do know is that they are incredibly symbolic and so important in the devotion to that tomb that lay empty 2,000 years ago. Well, we've a quick break to take, but don't go anywhere. This Vaticano special from Rome continues in just a moment. At the beginning of our journey, we started from here, from this square, St. Peter's Square, a place where art and faith come together to create this extraordinary beauty. The basilica we see today dates back to the 16th and 17th centuries and has an incredible history. And just think that during the more than 100 years it took to build it, the greatest artists of the time worked here: Raphael, Sanzio, Michelangelo, Bernini, and many others. It was these artists that gave physical beauty and life to the largest church in the world. But the first basilica, dedicated to the Apostle Peter, dates back to the 4th century. It was the one built by Emperor Constantine, and it remained intact for more than 1,200 years. Constantine, after conquering the Eastern Roman Empire in 324, decided to build a basilica over the tomb of the Apostle Peter, as an offering of thanks for his success in the battle against his rival Licinius. According to some medieval and Renaissance testimonies, the arch of the first St. Peter's Basilica read, "Since under your leadership the world has risen triumphant to the stars, Constantine the Victor has built you this basilica." In order to make room for the construction of the basilica, Constantine faced a series of technical and design problems. He had to bury the necropolis in this area, on the slopes of the Vatican Hill, even levelling an entire hill It was necessary to move over 40,000 cubic meters of earth. All this to build a monument over the tomb of the first pontiff in history, Saint Peter. According to a legend, the Emperor Constantine himself starts the construction of the Basilica by removing with his own hands the first 12 baskets of earth, one in honor of each apostle. When it comes to the martyrdom of St. Peter, he did not consider himself worthy to undergo the same death as Christ, and so he asked to be crucified upside down. And we still have a visible memory, a silent witness of that, right in the center of St. Peter's Square, the Vatican obelisk. It was in the presence of this very obelisk, which stood in Caligula's Circus, located on the left side of the ancient basilica, that Peter, according to tradition, was sentenced to death in 64 AD during the persecution of Emperor Nero, who blamed the Christians for the burning of the city of Rome. And in that obelisk, there is a hidden secret. A secret which once again links us back to Jerusalem, to Jesus' passion, and to that empty tomb. Because right at the very top, underneath the cross, there is another precious relic, another piece of the true cross of Christ. Thank you very much for watching this Vaticano special, and until next time, it's goodbye from Rome.